Okay, welcome and good evening. Welcome to another edition of Cepher Moments. This is Stephen Pigeon speaking, and we're going to have a good evening this evening. I want to welcome all of the subscribers to this channel and all of those of you that are in the chat. Thank you for joining us on this discussion of the Scarlet thread. You know, this is one of the great mysteries that appears in Scripture, and quite frankly, for me, it's been quite a mystery. And I want to look at this to determine what's going on here, because it kind of goes to an inherent bias in those historians who put together the scripture. In other words, there's kind of a negative thrust, if you will, to the scarlet thread. And this negative thrust is interesting. And the large question for us tonight is it warranted? That's going to be a big question. But when we look at this mystery of the scarlet thread, we're going to see its appearances here in Scripture. And then we're going to take a look at how that pans out in history. And the more I study this, I have to tell you, the more I study this, the more revelation appears. And the more things are being revealed. And the more they're being revealed, the more the mystery of the Old Testament becomes clear. You know, one of the things you see in the Old Testament that's really kind of draconian, if you will, is that, poor Abraham, it's written that Abraham believed and it was accounted unto him as righteousness. And yet, after he believes and he does what he's instructed to do, to be a stranger in a strange land, he goes and sojourns and he finds himself in a situation where suddenly that he is cast into a dream. And as he's cast into a dream, the dream shows, the fire walking between the parts. And then he's told, look, your generations are going to be taken into captivity in a strange land. Now, why would this happen? Why would this happen to the generation of Abraham, that they would be taken into a strange land? Well, I'll tell you, there is a mystery there. And that mystery goes to, I think, a big part of what we see happening in Scripture. And little things become very big things. For instance, when we talk about the idea of Abraham and Sarah, and of course Sarah is barren, and she can't have a child, and so she suggests to Abraham, well, why don't you just go, pick up a surrogate mother in Hagar, the stranger, and let's see if we can get a child from her. And then once the child's born, we can boot her to the curb, and that will be my child. So this was the proposition, and this was the attempt. And of course, once the baby was born, Hagar wasn't going anywhere. I'm the mother of this baby, and I'm not leaving, and I'm taking the baby with me. And so it was that Abraham loved the child Ishmael and considered him to be his true heir. And this is very interesting because, of course, of the wedding to his sister, his half sister, Sarai. But nonetheless, Yah said, I will come upon Sarai and I will make a miracle happen, and she will give birth. And this is what happened. A miracle did happen, and she did get pregnant, and she gave birth to Yitzhak. Now, the story of Yitzhak is a beautiful story in that Yitzhak, when he goes to find a wife, Abraham sends out an agent to go and represent him and to say, I'm representing the son of Abraham, who is a very well-heeled individual, and this son is going to succeed to everything he has. He's a great guy, on and on, and he's going to have a lot of money and so forth. So you should give up your daughter Rivka. And so the marriage is made with Rivka's consent and with the dowry and all that goes, that accompanied a really true scriptural wedding in the true sense. Proper courting, proper relationship, proper proofing of the parties, if you will, and also the proper approval of Yah through prayer and signs from the heavens in terms of who is going to do what. Now, once we accomplish this idea, Yitzhak does something that is unusual. Yitzhak decides to do what his father had done with his half-sister Sarai in representing himself to the Philistines as being the brother of Rivka. And they're there with the Philistines for many months until the king, Abimelech, finally finds out and says, hey, you know what? It looks to me like you're more than just a brother to your sister here. You guys look an awful lot like husband and wife to me, as far as I can tell. And so it was that they're sent away. But the narrative is kind of out of place in terms of how it fits in scripture. But nonetheless, Rivka is pregnant with two nations in her womb, two nations in her womb. And this little difficulty is going to become an enormous difficulty. And the difficulty is with us even to this very day. With this birth of Esau, the one of the twins, the first one to come out, and Yaakov, two nations were in her womb. And we see that this problem now is going to become quite significant. Now, one of the mysteries that always well, it disturbs me when I'm reading it, because, when I first was reading it in the KJV and in a lot of other English editions, they start talking about the children of Esau. You know him as Esau, but it's Esau. And they start referring to Duke so-and-so and Duke such and such, and this Duke and that Duke and the other Duke, and this Duke and that Duke, the other Duke. Now, in the Cepher, we use the Hebrew term there, which is Aleph or Aleph, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But Aleph would signify the person who had this ultimate tribal authority, the Aleph, if you will. And you can see that this is kind of the root word of the Caliph, which Caliph in Hebrew would mean like the Aleph, the Caliph. And so when you see Erdogan creating the caliphate, he's creating something like an alephate, which would have been the kingdom of an Aleph or an Aleph, who was identified as a tribal leader in the Ivri. So I'm asking myself the question, why do we have such an explicit and extensive list of these sons of Esau? Why is it so significant? I mean, name after name after name after name after name given as Aleph so-and-so and Aleph such and such. And the answer is, and this is a surprising answer, the answer is that this is the lineage of the pharaohs of Egypt. Now, the titles that you get of the pharaohs of Egypt, whether you're talking about Seti or Ramses or Hotep or whoever you may be talking about, these are titles. In other words, they're taken names after they ascend to the throne. It's kind of like, for instance, when you talk about Jorge Bergoglio. If I mentioned to you Jorge Bergoglio, you might say, well, who is Jorge Bergoglio? Never heard of that guy, but you have heard of him because he's the leader of the Catholic Church. He took the name Pope Francis, right? But his real name was Jorge Bergoglio. And it's the same thing that would happen in Egypt, that these pharaohs would take on a name that expressed their potentate, if you will, rather than their birth name. But their birth names are given to us in scripture because they're the sons of Esau. And so if you see this, that these are the sons of Esau, these are the Egyptian pharaohs, then where is the land of Sair? That's another question. Where is the land of Sair, to where our friend Esau took, where he went, right? Where is that land? Well, that's a good question, right? And so when we see this now, we begin to look now at this kind of divine mystery. So what happens is you see this kind of this departure that takes place between Yaakov and Esau. So Yaakov comes back from the land of Haran or Aram, and he comes back with his wives and his two concubines and 11 children. And when they come back, they confront Esau. And he brings all these crops in front of him, all these flocks in front of him, these herds, and he says, these are yours, these are yours, these are yours. And Esau is like, I don't need to do that. I've got a bunch of sons who are wealthier than you could possibly imagine. Why do I need your stuff? I don't need it. And so they agreed to part ways. And then Yaakov proceeds down to Beit El, which is the place where Yitzhak had established a well, where Abraham had established a well, and also where Yaakov had the dream and saw the angels ascending and descending, and his pillow was found there. Okay, so he is somewhere different than where Esau and his Alephs are, or his kings are. Okay, now with all of this, we get, of course, this story continues with more kind of problems in birth. So we see that Yaakov has these 12 sons, and he has six of these sons by his first wife, and he has two sons by his second wife that he intended to be his first wife. And then he has two sons by one concubine and two sons by the other, for a total of 12 sons and one daughter, Dinah. And with this tribe now, he is going to migrate into Egypt during the time of the famine. And of course, this famine is going to be managed by Yosef, who came alongside the Pharaoh. Now, Yosef probably did not know it at the time that the Pharaohs were the sons of Yesu. So he was actually working with his cousin and didn't know it. And so here he is working with the cousins in Mitzrayim, not Egypt, Mitzrayim. And in Mitzrayim, he engages in this idea of 7 years of sequestering. So how long is he here? Well, he does 12 years in prison. Then he does 7 years of accumulation to accumulate the wheat, coming into a famine. So 19 years precedes the famine. And then the famine comes in, and during the famine, the whole of the house of Yaakov is required to go down into the land of Yesu, the land of the Pharaohs, and to submit to their authority. And fortunately for them, Yosef is the one there that is in control. And Yosef says, well, here, I've got great land for you. Stay here, and I'll make sure everybody's fed for the 7-year famine and so forth. All right. Now, it's during this period of time that, Yaakov is going to bless the 12 children. This is in Genesis 49. Yaakov is going to bless the 12 children. And so he blesses them, and he has some very cruel things to say about Levi and Shimon, and really not nice things to say about Dan or about Benjamin, for that matter. He will raven like the wolf, right? But about Judah, Yehuda, he says that he will always have a scepter in his hand and a lawgiver between his feet till Shiloh come. This is a very interesting prescription. Now, the birthright of Abraham, which became an oath unto Yitzhak, which became a law unto Yaakov, which became an eternal covenant to the house of Yasharel, this birthright was given expressly to Yosef and to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. This is laid out in 1 Chronicles 5:1, that the birthright was the primogenitor birthright was to go to Reuben, for he was the firstborn of Leah. But inasmuch as he went up to his father's couch with Bilhah, it was taken away from him, and it was given to the firstborn son of Rachel, the second wife. It's an interesting line of procession. But what you see is, first of all, we have to recognize that the line of primogeniture is expressed in 1 Chronicles 5:1. There's an implication that the firstborn son is to receive the line of primogeniture. And the Torah provides that even though you are supposed to distribute your estate equally, that the firstborn son would receive a double portion. This is the law of primogeniture. Okay, so this law of primogeniture now is going to end up in the hands of Yosef and not in the hands of Reuben. But at no time did the birthright pass to Judah. The birthright did not pass to Judah. What passed to Judah was that Judah would have a scepter in his hands and a lawgiver between his feet till Shiloh come, and that he would rule over his brethren as a king. Okay, now kings are not necessarily approved in Scripture. If you read 1 Samuel 8, you'll see that Yah is quite offended about the fact that the people would leave the tenure of the judges, where they would live under the leadership of the judges, and demand a king. And Yah says, okay, I'm going to give you a king. And then if you want to go back, you're not going to get to go back, because I'll never hear that prayer again. And so they're given a king. And first it's Shaul, and then David. But Shaul is inordinate to the bloodline of Shiach, as you see in Matthew 1. But when we go back and we look at what happened with Judah, okay, so here's Judah, and Judah's got this big promise. You're going to have the scepter in your hand and a lawgiver between your feet until Shiloh comes. So what does Judah do? Well, he goes out and he takes a Canaanite girl. Doesn't say he takes her as his wife. He just takes this Canaanite girl and gets her pregnant. And the next thing you know, she has my three sons. And these my three sons are basically, they have a Canaanite disposition. And the first one is supposed to marry Tamar, who is a Hebrew girl. That doesn't happen. Well, it does happen actually, but Yah strikes him dead because he's so cruel. And so the next son, Onan, says, "Yeah, okay, fine. I'll become the kinsman redeemer and I'll marry her. But even though any children are going to be considered the children of my brother and not of mine, why would that interest me?" And so he offends Yah himself, and Yah takes him out. So that leaves the third son, who is who knows how many years younger than Tamar. But he's promised to Tamar, that Yehuda promises him to Tamar, except when he grows up to get old enough to get married, he marries someone else and he leaves Tamar in the lurch. So Tamar, of course, this is Genesis chapter 38. Tamar, in the middle of all this, decides that she has heard that Yehuda is going up to Timnah to shear sheep and other things, and she decides to hold herself out as a harlot along the way. And he propositions her, and she says, "Well, okay, give me a kid goat." And he says, "No, I don't have a kid goat with me right now." And she says, "Fine, give me your signet, your staff, and your cloak, and then these I will hold, and then you can redeem it with a kid goat." Anyway, she ends up pregnant, and she ends up pregnant with twins, not just a little pregnant, but she ends up pregnant with twins. Now, the scriptures do not describe her as having two nations in her womb. It doesn't say that. It says she has twins. And so the twins at best in Rivkah were fraternal twins, but they might also have been sub-infecundation, which is to say two children from two different fathers. Okay, but nonetheless, when we get to the twins in Tamar, these are identical twins. Okay, so now what happens during the birth? Well, during the birth, a hand comes out, and in scripture, that's the firstborn. Whoever breaks the matrix is the firstborn. The hand comes out, and a scarlet thread is tied around his hand. Okay, now that's where we're going to pick this up. All right, so let's get into this PowerPoint a little bit and see where we are. Okay, Cepher Moments, the Scarlet Thread, all citations taken from the Cepher Millennium Edition. Okay, so let's start here in Vayikra or Leviticus 14:1-7. And Yahweh spoke unto Moshe, saying, "This shall be the Torah of the leper in the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought up unto the priest, and the priest shall go forth out of the camp. And the priest shall look, and behold, if the plague of leprosy be healed in the leper. Then the priest shall command to take for him that is to be cleansed 2 birds alive and clean, and cedar wood, and scarlet, and hyssop." Scarlet and hyssop. Okay, so what is this telling you? This is some kind of scarlet. Is it scarlet cloth, scarlet thread, some kind of scarlet? Shall take scarlet and hyssop, and the priest shall command that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, and the cedar wood, and the scarlet, and the hyssop, and shall dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water, and shall sprinkle upon him that is to be cleansed from leprosy 7 times, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird loose into the open field. Okay, now look at this for a second. We got so many things going on here. Okay, first of all, we're going to see the use of scarlet here in this, and we're going to see that what? That there's going to be 2 birds. Now, you might recall that during the Feast of Atonement or Yom Kippur, there are 2 goats. And you can also see that one of the birds is to be killed, but the other bird is to be left alive. This is similar to the Yom Kippur feast, where one goat is killed for the sins of Yasharel, and the other goat is released. Okay. And as for the living bird, he shall take it in the cedar wood and the scarlet. So the scarlet is now associated with what? The living bird. And shall dip them in the living bird in the blood of the bird, dip them in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. And he shall sprinkle him that is to be cleansed from the leprosy 7 times and shall pronounce him clean. And then shall let the living bird loose into the open field or into the wilderness, if you will. Okay, this is a very interesting ceremony concerning leprosy. And this is a ceremony that is being used to give us a kind of a forecasting, if you will, of what's going to take place in Yom Kippur. All right. We see in the command 2 birds. One is to be killed in an earthen vessel, the other to be dipped in the blood of the bird that was killed, covered in scarlet and hyssop. Once used for this ritual, the living bird is released into the open field. The prophecy here is enormous. Now, you might recall the issue of baptism. Now, baptism, in my opinion, is not a mikvah. This is what a lot of people try to confuse baptism with a mikvah, but it really is not a mikvah so much as it is a tabal, which means to immerse. We, in our baptism, are the hyssop dipped in the blood of the Lamb. And there's a lot of complications to this, but if you read in 1 John 5:8, you'll see that the word, the water and the blood, or the spirit, the water and the blood, they agree as one. And so when you are dipped in the water, you're dipped like hyssop in the water. It's like a bunch of hyssop being dipped in the blood. So in Shemot, Exodus, it reads, and you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and strike the lintel and the 2 side posts with the blood that's in the basin, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning. This dip a bunch of hyssop in it, dip it in the blood, is tabal. That's the word. Okay. Now let's take a look at the goats of Yom Kippur. And he, Aharon, shall take of the assembly of the children of Yasharel 2 kids of goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for an ascending smoke offering. That's Vayikra 16:5. And he shall take the 2 goats and present them before Yahweh at the door of the tabernacle of the assembly. And Aharon shall cast lots upon 2 goats. Okay, so we're going to pick, right? Let's pick long straw. 1 lot for Yahweh, the other lot for Azazel, and Aharon shall bring the goat out upon which Yahweh's lot fell, and offer him for a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell for Azazel shall be presented alive before Yahweh to make an atonement with him and to let him go for Azazel into the wilderness. Okay, now look at that. Look at that for just a second. He is to make an atonement with him and to let him go for Azazel into the wilderness. All right. Very interesting that we have this kind of connection going on. So there's 2 goats, there's 2 birds, there's 2 goats. And what about the goat that goes out into the wilderness? Well, guess what? Once again, we see 1 goat is killed, but the other left alive and released into the wilderness. The ritual of choosing 2 animals, birds, slaughtering one and sending away the other, is then repeated in the Yom Kippurim scapegoat ritual, Vayikra 16, in which the 1 animal is sacrificed as a hatat, or a purification offering to Yahweh, while the other is sent into the wilderness to Azazel, the fallen watcher to whom the guilt of the transgression was assigned. According to the Mishnah, the Hasmonean practice, the thread was tied to the scapegoat twice. First, it was tied immediately following the casting of the lot for the 2 goats, and then tied again on the scapegoat after it had been sent into the wilderness and immediately before it was pushed off a cliff. All right, so this was a scarlet thread that was tied on the scapegoat. The Epistle of Barnabas, which was likely written in Alexandria sometime between the destruction of Herod's temple around AD 70 and the Bar Kokhba rebellion of AD 131, writes, take 2 goats, goodly and alike, and offer them, and let the priest take the one as a burnt offering for sins. But what are they to do with the other? And do ye all spit on it and goad it and bind the scarlet wool about its head, and so let it be cast into the desert. So we see here, this is not a Judaic record, but rather a quasi Christian record. Bind the scarlet wool about its head and let it be cast into the desert. Okay, Tertullian wrote in his Latin text against the Jews, writes as follows. So again, I will make an interpretation of the two goats which were habitually offered on the fast day. One of them begirt with scarlet. See, there it is again. One is begirt with scarlet, amid cursing and universal spitting and tearing and piercing, was cast away by the people outside the city into perdition. Okay, into a certain death in the wilderness, cast into a certain death into the wilderness, cast into perdition, released into the wilderness, released into the wild. Okay, and this one was begirt with scarlet. All right. So I think we can see here that we have a New Testament, if you will, New Testament era writings, two witnesses, both Barnabas and Tertullian, telling us what the practice was of the two goats, both identifying it with scarlet wool and around the goat that was cast into the desert, similar to the scarlet that was used to wrap the bird that was left alive. Okay, so somehow we see a linking of the scarlet thread to the marking of that set aside for sin, yet something that will live when it is cast into the wilderness. Now, let's take a look at the birth of these twins that are in Tamar. This is from Genesis 38, Reshith 38, verse 27. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. You see, not two nations, twins. Twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. Now, this is kind of an interesting situation, because if they're identical twins, you might want to know which one came out first, right? Well, that looks just like the hand I saw first. Well, that's not going to work. So they put a scarlet thread around his hand. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, how have you broken forth? This breach be upon you. Now, this is some big language right here. This breach be upon you. Therefore, his name was called Peretz. And afterward came out his brother who had the scarlet thread upon his land, and his name was called Zerah. Okay. All right. So this breach be upon you. Now, let's take a look at these. Zerah, this is Strong's H2025, comes from 2024, meaning a rising of light. Okay, a rising light. Peretz, on the other hand, means a break or a breach, breaking forth, a gap. It comes from the word paratz, which is spelled the same way, peresh, tzadi. And it says this is the primitive root, meaning to break out. In many applications, direct and indirect, literal or figurative, to break abroad, to make a breach, to break away, to burst out, to spread abroad, to compel, to disperse, to grow, to increase, to open, press, scatter, or urge. Yet it is the rock who is marked with the scarlet thread, allowed to live, and ultimately sent into the wilderness. And before they were laid down, she, Rakav, came up unto them on the roof. Now, this is another story out of the book of Joshua. And this is when Joshua is about to invade and destroy Jericho. And the two spies come in to spy out the city, and they're met by the prostitute Rachav. A lot of people refer to as Rahab, kind of like Ahab, the Arab. But it's Rachav. And so before they were laid down, Rachav came up upon them on the roof. And she said to the men, I know that Yahweh has given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard at how Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when ye came out of Mitzrayim, and what ye did unto the two kings of the Amorim that were on the other side of the Yarden, Sishon and Og, whom he utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For Yahweh Elohim, he is the Elohim in heaven above and in earth beneath. Okay, so we have Rachav recognizing that it's not Thoth or Set or Horus or Isis, or Osiris or anybody else, but rather it's Yahweh Elohim. He is the Elohim in heaven above and in the earth beneath. Now, therefore, I pray you, swear 7 oaths unto me by Yahweh, since I have showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my father's house and give me a true sign, and that you will save alive my father and my mother and my brethren and my sisters and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. And the men answered her, our life for yours, if ye utter not this our business. And it shall be, when Yahweh has given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with you. Then she let them down by a cord through the window, for her house was upon the town wall, and she dwelt upon the wall. And she said unto them, get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourself there for 3 days, until the pursuers be returned, and afterward you may go your way. And the men said unto her, we will be blameless of this your 7 oaths, which you have made us to swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall bind this line of scarlet thread in the window, which you did let us down by, and you shall bring your father and your mother and your brethren and all your father's household home unto you. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be upon his own head, and we will be guiltless. But whosoever shall be with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if any hand be upon him. And if you utter this our business, then we will be free of your 7 oaths which you have made us to swear. And she said, according to your word, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed. She bound the scarlet line in the window. And again, the scarlet thread is going to result in somebody being left alive and allowed to go into the wilderness. Okay. Once again, we see the idea that with the marker of the scarlet thread, someone would be saved alive, released into the wilderness, but the unmarked would be set to sacrifice in an atonement as a sin offering. Is this the case with the house of Peretz? Most assuredly so, for the Mashiach is truly of the house of Peretz. From here we see Matthew 1, verses 1 through 3, the Cepher of the generation of Yahushua HaMashiach, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Yitzchak. Yitzchak begat Yaakov. Yaakov begat Yehudah and his brethren. And Yehudah begat Peretz and Zerach of Tamar. And Peretz begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Aram. And down the line it goes all the way to Mashiach. So if you want to see the true Pharisee, the Pereshim, the true Pharisee is Mashiach, because he truly is of the house of Perez. But the house of Perez is the house that is unmarked with the red thread. Therefore, it is the house from which the sacrifice of atonement must come. Do you see this? This is the house from which the sacrifice must come. And ultimately, it is what comes, and it comes 42 generations from Abraham. But what about Zerach and the house of Zerach, the primogenitor of Yehudah, the firstborn of Yehudah, who would have the scepter in his hand and a lawgiver between his feet until Shiloh come, was marked with the scarlet thread and released into the wilderness. And so scripture is demeaning as to the house of Zerach. Now, let me give you an example. When we look at 1 Kings chapter 5, we see this. And Shalom's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Mitzrayim, for he was even wiser than all men, including Ethan, the Azeraki, and Haman, and Calcol, and Darda, and the sons of round dancing, and his fame was in all nations round about. Now, you read in the translations the word Ezraki, right? However, we find what? Ezraki is a patronymic from age 22-26, an Ezrakite, or what? Descendant of Zerach, because they left out the E right here. Now, technically, when you see the Aleph, let me see if I can show this better here. Just one second. Let's take a look at this here and get a little better idea, maybe. Okay. So when we talk about the Hebrew here, we've got this idea of the Aleph, the Aleph. Then we have the Zain, the Resh, the Chet, and the Yod. Okay, so here you can see with the name Zerak, you see the name Zerak right here, Zerak. So this, the Zerak key, this is Ethan of A. I will remember that I, the prefix. What's this prefix mean? I will be. I will be. Zerak, key. I will be of Zerak. I will be of Zerak. Okay. So this Azeraki would be a better way to spell this rather than Ezraki. But we're going to see this name Ezraki appear in other places in Scripture, and I'll show you where. But nonetheless, we see this demeaning. What's it say? So he was wiser than all men, than Ethan the Azeraki, and Haman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Machol, is how you read it in most Bibles, and they use Machol as a proper name. They try to spell it as a proper name. Oh, let's see. He's the son of Machol. Well, there is no Machol. That's the only place in Scripture that you find anybody named Machol, and there's nobody named Machol. This is actually a word meaning round dancing. These were the sons of round dancing, not of Machol. Okay. And his fame, Shalomo's fame, was in all the nations round about. Okay. Well, okay. So he's even more wise than Ethan the Azeraki. So Ethan the Azeraki was known for some substantial wisdom. If you're going to compare Solomon to him and say, oh, yeah, Solomon's even smarter than Ethan. Okay. Or Ethan. All right. Well, let's see what else we see. And the sons of Zerak. Now, here in First Chronicles, we finally get the truth being told as to who the sons are. And the sons of Zerak, Zimri, and Ethan, and Haman, and Calcol, and Darda, 5 of them in all. Okay, this becomes very, very important that we see that in First Kings, you have a disclosure that is intentionally obfuscated, intentionally weird, and even demeaning. It's a put down. Oh, yeah, these guys thought they were smart, but Shalomah is smarter than them, right? We have this child of the line of Perez who is much smarter than this line of Zerak. Well, who was Ethan? Well, Ethan was the writer of Psalm 89, right? Go take a look. Maskil of Ethan the Azeraki. Okay, that's from Psalm 89:1. And who's Haman? Haman is the writer of Psalm 88, a song or mizmor of the sons of Korah to the chief musician upon the Makalat Leonot. Now, the Makalat Leonot is another name for a Jupiter 8 synthesizer that they had back in those days. No, I'm just kidding. But it is upon some kind of an extensive instrument, the Makalat Leonot. This is the maskil of Haman the Azeraki. So you see that both Ethan and Haman are psalm writers. Okay, they're psalm writers. So these guys are not, they're not just lightweight people. Okay. So the persistent secular legends from Greece and Ireland, including the Harmsworth Encyclopedia, identify Calcol with Cecrops the First, the founder of Athens. Now, it's just not in Greece and Ireland, although the writing in Ireland is extensive about how Calcol was very well known in Greece and in Egypt and in Ireland as this founder of Athens. And Harmsworth also suggests that Cecrops founded Athens around 1700 BC. The Assyrian records suggest a westward migration of the alleged descendants of Calcol along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, establishing Iberian trading settlements. Iberian is Hebrew. It's another word for Hebrew. One settlement now called Zaragoza or Saragossa in the Ebro Valley in Spain, was originally known as Zaragasa, meaning the stronghold of Zerah. Not what people would try to tell you was that this was Augustus. They're named after Augustus, right? Tsar Augustus, right? That's a Roman extrapolation, Roman usurpation. From Spain, they continued westward as far as Ireland. The Iberians gave their name to Ireland, calling the land Iberne, which was later abbreviated merely to Ern, and subsequently Latinized to Hibernia. Hibernia. Okay, so this comes from Captain E. Raymond's missing links discovered in Assyrian tablets, studying of Assyrian tables that reveal the fate of the lost tribes of Israel. Okay, legends from Greece and Rome identified Dara as Dardanus, the founder of ancient Troy. This is from the Oxford Dictionary of Praise and Fable. At least one translation of the Antiquities of Flavius Josephus, in mentioning King Solomon as being wiser than two men named Calcol and Dara, or Darda, gives Dara's name as Dardanos. Okay, so in the Antiquities, Josephus is going to use not Dara, but Dardanos. Okay, all right. That's interesting. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, here we go. And Sakuniathon, a Phoenician historian, says that Cronus, whom the Phoenicians called Israel, had a son named Jehud or Yehuda. That's Corey's ancient fragments. And from the above, some would cite Sakuniathon as testifying that Dardanus, who founded the Trojan king, was a descendant of Jehud or Judah, whose father, Jehud would actually be pronounced Yehud, and whose father was Israel or Yasharel. This is consistent with scripture. Okay, so this kind of wraps up our discussion here today. And so I'm going to stop the share here for a moment. And, well, maybe I'll just, let's just stop the share so I can actually see what's going on here for a minute. All right. And I wanted to just kind of hope you guys enjoyed that presentation. And so what we see here is that when you see this discussion on the Scarlet Thread, I'm going to continue this discussion more and get far more into the depth of what's going on with the House of Zerah. But we can see here that there's a great mystery that is contained in the scripture, in what the scripture doesn't say, in not revealing to us the entire lineage of Zerah. And what we're going to find is that this lineage is, in fact, well detailed in the Irish literature, the whole bloodline of Zerah, right on up through the High Irish Kings. And we're going to see that this relationship that takes place in Egypt is very, very interesting, because Zerah does, in fact, is released into the wilderness before the Exodus of Moshe. Only a small residual, the sons of Zimri, retain with the tribes of Yasharel into the Exodus. The house of Zerah is gone, released into the wilderness. What did they do? We'll see. We're going to find out. Okay. Well, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this particular discussion, and we will see you next week. And remember, we do have the large print is finally back in stock at Cepher.net. And believe me, it's been some work getting the live print, the large print. But that's a 14-point font. It's a bona fide large print text. They're in really good condition. So if you're looking for a good book, that'll be a good one to pick up. And hopefully we're going to have some more great news for you in the first of the year. Okay. So I want to thank you guys for being with me. Thanks all you people in the chat for being here, and all you who have subscribed to this channel. And we will see you next week. Oh, by the way, one other thing. Next week, I'm not going to be doing a Cepher Moments per se, although it is going to be a Cepher Moments, but it's going to be a Q&A session. So what we're going to do is we're going to open it up to the subscribers in the chat for questions, and we're going to kind of go down the question road and see how we do. Okay. All right. So thank you guys. It's been great being with you here tonight, and we will see you again soon.